Okay, we will go ahead and get started. A warm welcome to everyone that has hopped on to today's webinar. We appreciate you setting aside several moments of your time to learn a little bit more about ASAP service. Before we get started, I'm going to go into a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will make sure that all individuals that have joined the webinar and registered for the webinar get a recorded version that they can watch on demand at their convenience. Additionally, today, we also have a Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. You can feel free to type a question that you have in at any time, and at certain intervals throughout the presentation, we will pause and accept audience questions. And we also will be making sure that you get a copy of the PowerPoint, which actually, never mind, we don't have a copy of the PowerPoint, apologies. We will make sure you get a copy of the recording after today's presentation. We have a couple of polling questions that we will be popping up here throughout the morning that will help us better craft our questions to the individuals that have joined us today. So once again, thanks for joining us. Today's discussion brings together two very important perspectives. Number one, the operational side of ASAP, what it's really like inside an emergency communication center managing alarm volume and response. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the solution side with respect to ASAP service, how the automation works and how it's designed to address alarm challenges within the ECC. A huge welcome and a very big thank you to Andrew Knapp, who has joined us today. He is the director of Hamilton County Emergency Communications Center in Ohio. Thank you, Andrew.
Good morning.
Also with us today, we have Karen Carlson, who is the general manager of ASAP Service. My name is Morgan Saba. I am the marketing director at Mission Critical Partners, who has partnered with the Monitoring Association to help grow adoption of ASAP Service. So with that, we're just going to quickly open up with a very fast poll. We really want to know from our audience what their role is within their ECC. And while you're answering that question, I am going to talk a little bit with Andrew first about the challenge that his ECC, Hamilton County, was facing before implementing ASAP. So Andrew, thinking back to when Hamilton County implemented ASAP, give us a little bit of a background of what was happening in the center that prompted you to explore the ASAP solution.
Okay, well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hamilton County, Ohio, we've been in business since 1949. We're a multi-jurisdictional dispatch center. We have 48 municipalities that surround the city of Cincinnati. And having been in business since 1949, we've always wanted to try to find the best way to serve our residents, the best way to serve our public safety responders. And so, thinking back, we did an implementation, in 2019, prior to COVID even hitting, and what we were experiencing was the downturn in our staffing levels. We were having a difficult time even pre-COVID of finding good quality people that wanted to choose public safety telecommunications for a career. As everyone knows, it's 24/7, it's 365, it's weekends, it's holidays, and so this industry has just been struggling for quite some time with staffing. And so we wanted to find ways of how can we use technology to our advantage that will help serve not just the residents and not just the responders, but also serve our own internal people so that we could maybe take some of the load off of the non-emergency telephone calls that are coming into us. We certainly want to prioritize our 911 traffic and take really good care of our citizens when they absolutely need help. The challenge is the same folks that are the emergency responders that are taking care of the 911 traffic, just like everywhere else across the nation. They're also engaged in non-emergency type of roles as well. So the ASAP service, when I heard about it, it was intriguing in that it's taking what we know traditionally is a very high call volume of alarms, regardless if it's an intrusion alarm, the burglary alarms, the panic alarms, the hold-up alarms, the medical alarms, the fire alarms, and each one has its own subdivisions of types of alarms. But we know that a majority of those alarms are being handled by the same exact people that handle 911 traffic. So when the ASAP service became available, we went after that. We did some research and we found just how helpful it was in helping us offload some of that traffic. And we were not disappointed in any way, shape, or form that we made that choice.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for giving us that perspective. Can you walk us through what a typical alarm call looked like before you implemented ASAP? How did the telecommunicators handle that process?
Sure, and this is where the power of ASAP really shows itself. Um, a typical call prior to the ASAP implementation, or a typical incident, we'll call it an incident. I think everyone that handles these types of calls knows that you get the initial phone call reporting. Let's just pick on an intrusion alarm, for example. You get the initial call reporting an intrusion alarm. You may get another call saying, we've tried to contact the location and there's been no answer. You may get another call that says we've made contact and they want officers to respond. You may get another contact that says, hey, they're on vacation, but I've got a key holder that's responding. You could get another call that said, hey, we got a key holder responding. Here's their ETA. Here's the type of vehicle they're driving, and all that information. So, a standard intrusion alarm, although I wouldn't say that every single one of them generates 3 to 4 calls, it's not uncommon to get, two, three, 4 phone calls relative to a single incident, a single dispatchable CAD incident, and so that's where your center really struggles with. This is one incident that I think candidly we recognize there's a lot of false alarms, and I don't know how many false alarms we have, but I think all of us can generally agree that quite often these are false alarms, but nonetheless they need to be investigated to the fullest extent. But to get 3 and 4 calls for a single incident, although it was absolutely necessary, that was a side effect, if you will. And I've been thinking a lot about this. I would venture to say it's easy to say that if you were to total up all of your alarm calls for an entire year, and I would say 2.5 phone calls for every one CAD dispatch incident. And so prior to ASAP, you had those individual phone calls with individual bits and pieces of information. And it doesn't matter if you're a large center that has call takers on one side of the room and radio operators on the other, or if you're like most dispatch centers are, the call taker is the dispatcher. Those calls can be quite burdensome in that it's one incident, and it's likely one incident that although it has dispatch activity, it may or may not be what winds up being a high profile incident. And so to have 3 and 4 phone calls for an incident that really, although it resulted in a response, it was not what our jobs are for taking this 911 calls for saving lives over the phone, for saving lives and property. And so prior to ASAP, we were getting 3 and 4, sometimes 5 calls on a singular incident, and also take in the larger dispatch centers where there may be a separation in a room, regardless of how big the room is. If there are different people taking different aspects of that phone call, you're starting back from ground zero. So when dispatch or call taker number 1 takes the initial call, and then call taker number 7 across the room takes another call, they got to go and do some research and find that run in order to make sure they update the correct run. If you're a large volume center, again, those phone calls coming in, making sure that you update the correct CAD incident, making sure that you make contact with a radio operator, or imagine being a radio operator on a very busy channel where you need to have a call taker call the alarm company back to have a key holder respond. All of these things take so much time, effort, and energy, and we can consolidate that quite quickly by implementing the ASAP service.
That's great. Thank you. I think you have a lot of individuals on the call who can relate to that. You are getting lots of thumbs up when you were explaining that process. So thanks to the audience for their engagement. Karen, can you talk to us a little bit about where these inefficiencies come from a systems perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Morgan. And by the way, I could hear Hamilton County's admin line ringing, and it might have been an alarm call while Andrew was explaining all of that. But from a system perspective, alarm companies are not in the same location as the ECC that they're reporting the alarm to, and therefore they cannot use 911 to report it. So they have to use an admin line to make that phone call. As Andrew very well described, admin lines are the last to get answered after 911 calls are handled, because those 911 calls take, very specific voice protocols, that can only be handled by voice. And so those alarm calls are getting delayed and answered because of that reason, right? Because they must call an administrative line, we've talked about. Where the other inefficiencies come in is there's certain data that cannot be transmitted via voice, right? Can you transmit over, via voice, a photo, an audio clip, a video clip, those kinds of things you can't. So there's certain data that can't be transmitted via voice. And so that's another layer of inefficiency that comes into, the alarm handling process. Just those things that can help responders, with, just determining who are the right resources to go. Do we need more resources? Do we need to escalate that fire alarm from alarm one, level 1 to a 5, things like that. So all of this additional data that is possible via ASAP isn't available via that voice transmission today. And not all information is available on that very first call to the ECC. So they may be calling it in, but the monitoring center is continuing to call looking for a key holder, any information, any updates to it. So those inefficiencies come by every single update to that alarm, including potentially a cancellation, have to go through that administrative phone call process and more delays. And a lot, as Andrew was describing what the telecommunicator world is like, where they're handling all of these things, the same is true on the monitoring center side. So if the ECC must call the monitoring center back, it's a new person that they're getting. That person has to pull up that alarm. When it's coming across via ASAP, it just, everything, all the information pops to the next person who's answering that digitally in the ASAP solution.
Great. Thanks, Karen, for breaking that down for us. So we're going to go back to Andrew and talk a little bit about back in 2019. You explained to us a little bit about what was happening in the ECC with respect to alarm processing. So when you finally decided to, make the change to ASAP, what prompted that decision? What made you decide to actually pull the trigger for a lot of the audience that is considering possibly making the same transition?
So what really threw us over the edge about pulling the trigger on it per se was the concept that I can have these CAD incidents. We know they are dispatchable incidents that are going to result in some type of public safety response. I can have these automatically go to our radio operators. I can have it integrated to our CAD system. We're a central square shop, and ASAP can operate with just about any type of CAD program, and that's the nice thing now is technology is advanced. The CAD platforms have become so open to integrating with these other ancillary services that it's one of the little things that you can do to add into your system that is going to then minimize the number of actual phone calls that come into your dispatch center. So I think what really made us pull the trigger is I'm going to see an increase in efficiency. It's going to, the ASAP service is going to present right at the radio operator position. It's going to be available for dispatch much faster. And then also, one thing we haven't talked about is the improvement in accuracy of these calls. We all hire humans. We are all fallible as humans, and we all, have good days, bad days, and everyone makes mistakes, and that's part of the human condition. So when you're talking about a fire alarm, you're talking about a medical alarm, you're talking about these high profile alarms where they occur, but when they do occur, you need to make sure that your information as accurate as possible. This is a complete reduction in the amount of fingers that go into the pot that are having an impact on the incident itself, where it's not being read and interpreted by someone at the alarm monitoring center, and then interpreted again by someone at the dispatch center, and then interpreted again by someone at the radio position. So you're eliminating several steps where the human influence that causes a mistake can happen. So really what threw it over the edge for us was a combination of the increased efficiency and the efficiency we gained by making my call takers available and allowing them to be available for our true emergency 911 traffic, and then increasing the efficiency that it's going right to the radio operators. It's going to be accurate. It's coming from the alarm monitoring center. It's likely electronically transmitted on their end. I can't speak what they see on the alarm monitoring side of things. But when you eliminate these abilities for these minor tweaks of transposing a name or transposing a number, and even in our world, we all have these regional streets where it looks like it's spelled like this, but it is actually pronounced like that. And so we see in a large area where we are, depending on how the alarm company would say the name of the street. And obviously not all alarm monitoring centers are located within your geography, so they may not realize how that is pronounced, and it could wind up being a completely different street name. So you gain efficiency on so many levels. You gain the ability to keep your other call takers available for the true emergency incidents. And so that's really what threw us over the edge, is that this transmitting these incidents electronically directly from the monitoring system into our CAD system. It was I hate to say a no-brainer, because obviously you have to weigh so many factors on how this is going to function for you. But even if you look at the costs, and everyone's costs are obviously different, it's absolutely worth the return on your investment into this technology in this scenario.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. While we're hearing from Karen, if we wouldn't mind deploying the second poll. I think we have a poll out there that makes a lot of sense at this stage in the presentation today. So Karen, talk to us a little bit about when agencies get to this point that Andrew is talking about, or that Andrew reached, where it was just time to make the decision to transition in 2019. What is it that agencies are usually looking for in a solution during this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. I think I'm gonna give the perspective both from a technology side of it, but also I share the operations side of it with Andrew. One of the things that they are looking for is a solution that's simple to implement and reliable. Give me just 30 seconds here. And so that reliability also leads into following the 80-20 rule. What I mean by that is having a solution that handles the majority of the alarm companies and the alarms that are coming in through the platform is what we're looking for here. That it's doing 80% of the work, so that we're making sure we're getting the most coverage we can out of it. And also, when you're looking at implementation, low involvement of your staff in that implementation process, but there's not a lot of work for them to do. All of these things lead to, making or looking at those costs, all of those costs, and how that can make that return on investment that Andrew talked about undeniable to achieve and receive that board approval that you can to move forward. You're also looking for something that works in the background. Andrew described this is going straight into CAD. This is like the unseen telecommunicator. So looking for those ways, basically, to move that forward.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Oh, I don't know.
Right. I'm getting a coughing spell, so my apologies.
It's okay. Wasn't sure if you are done with your answer, if we need to give you a little bit more time.
No, I'm done.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're going to come back to you here, if that's okay. And actually, let's go with Andrew. Let's give Andrew an opportunity to talk a little bit about how ASAP fits into the day-to-day operations happening at the center right now, and how the telecommunicators responded to the new implementation.
Sure. So, from a telecommunicator standpoint, it's a seamless integration. If you can imagine, in our environment where we have dedicated call takers and dedicated radio operators, the implementation comes in the form of something that our radio operators are already comfortable with. They're already receiving these incidents from across the room, if you will. And so the ASAP service winds up being just another one of our employees. And the nice thing about it is it's the vendor agnostic on the alarm company. So regardless of what alarm company it is, it's all coming through a singular point, which means there's been some data formatting that's been done for you to standardize and streamline that process. And one of the things, as Karen was talking about, that I thought of is using the ASAP service. I know that we make contact with alarm companies sometimes in advance of them coming online, and they'll share with us the accounts they have. And while they may not share with us the name of the people and what's being covered, they at least share the address. Sharing those addresses and allowing us to work with the alarm companies and saying, wait a minute, this street is spelled this way, it's hyphenated this way, the space is this way. We have eliminated an incredible amount of errors that normally would be encountered at the call taking phase. And what happens when you encounter those errors at the call taking phase is that it does what? It delays the call. So the more back and forth there is between the call, alarm company calling in by voice, and now my record doesn't match your record, but and you guys know that work in 911 centers, our records are the authority. Like we're the ones that are always right, and Google Maps is not necessarily right, but our maps are right. And the whole challenge of some places like to separate their jurisdictions by zip code. Well, we don't really deal in zip codes because they don't follow political boundaries. So one of the things that's a side effect, if you will, is that we engage with these alarm companies in advance of needing that address. We've eliminated a lot of errors right off the bat. And again, it's agnostic. So the day-to-day operation for us is so much more streamlined. It goes directly to the radio operator. Chances are that data has been pre-geo validated before we even had an incident at that address. We can then also have near real-time communication with the alarm monitoring center, regardless of where they're at. So when I need a key holder, instead of a radio operator having to pick up a phone, which is incredibly dangerous for us, we have such high call volumes at our radio positions that the last thing in the world I want is one of our radio operators tied up on the phone. Well, so that requires tying up then another call taker across the room and conversation. I'm using conversation, which instead of saying yelling across the room, because we would never yell across the room, right? But the conversation across the room to try to engage somebody in making a phone call for you, all of that goes out the window. So again, from a day-to-day operation, I have through the ASAP interface near real-time communication with the alarm company by a quick command. You can promulgate how you want it in our system. You put an at sign ASAP, and whatever you type after that point, that goes to the alarm monitoring center. So if I can say something as simple as a key holder is needed at this location, or we have an actual fire at this location, or police have been there and nothing's found. So that near real-time communication back and forth over that ASAP interface, it's not a separate screen that we've had to learn. It's not a separate website that we have to go to. It's integrated directly into our CAD system. So it becomes a regularly used tool in our toolbox that is just an absolute game changer for our industry in keeping our folks available and available on the phones, but also engaged with their dispatch channel if they are one of the radio dispatchers.
That's great. Thank you. It's definitely so critical that ASAP service is directly integrated right into an existing workflow. So I really appreciate you going into a little bit of detail there. Karen, I'm going to come over to you because I know that a lot has changed with respect to implementation, even just in the last 12 to 18 months. So can you walk us through what agencies should expect during ASAP implementation. How much time does it take? Who needs to be involved? All of those different details, please.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Morgan. Yeah, as you know, Andrew's impressed, right? This is about CAD integration, and the gold standard for ASAP is that CAD integration. So one of the very important aspects or people involved in this is your CAD vendor. Making sure that we're communicating with your CAD vendor before you make the decision and after you make the decision, and being lockstep and in sync with them as to what they can provide. Now, Morgan, you mentioned, new things with ASAP. So one of the things that has recently happened late last year was when one of the things MCP was involved with was refreshing the infrastructure of ASAP. And we basically recreated or improved the infrastructure and put it up in the AWS Gov Cloud. So still has all of the security, CJIS security levels that you would have when it existed inside of the Enlets data center. But it also allows your CAD vendor to be able to connect directly between the ECC CAD system and ASAP broker versus going through the state switch. We still support all of those existing state switch Enlets connections. And if an agency still wants to do that, we are doing that today. We have several agencies that we are currently implementing through their state switch. So if you're doing that, another party that needs to be at the table is the state. If you're going through them to get the state IDs, to get the routing through them, all of that sort of things. So that's another piece. GIS data. Andrew did a great job of explaining that we do a lot of pre-validation of all of the addresses, and the monitoring centers adapt their addresses to match the ECC addresses so that when it comes through, it automatically creates that incident. So similarly to how a CAD to CAD interface works, right? That information comes through, it automatically creates that CAD incident. And that's why we need the GIS data, so that we can do all that validation up front of those alarms that are known by the monitoring centers that are going to send them to you. From a staffing perspective, we do need a little bit of your staff time. Obviously, you're going to go through the purchasing approval process, and you're going to need to do some budgeting for those upfront costs that will be part of it. But we do need those staff that would be involved to provide us the GIS data, and then likely a supervisor or other position within the center that would be responsible for testing with us, training the end users, just validating all of the connection points and what we're putting together there. And I did mention funding. There is two pieces of the funding. We do need funding with your CAD vendor for their interface implementation fees. And then there are ASAP implementation fees as well. Now, the ASAP implementation fees are a one and done. You pay it up front. It's a non-recurring charge. There's no maintenance on that or anything like that, unless you do change CAD vendors at some point in the future. Then there'd be some additional services at that point in time. But for the most part, that's really what to expect for implementation of ASAP. And since we've made these new changes in the infrastructure, we have brought agencies live as quick as 2 to 3 months. Some a little bit longer. It really kind of depends on a couple things. The availability of your CAD vendor, your staff availability, and if you're going through the state switch, then those things. So those are the dependencies we bake into it once we do the kickoff with your agency. So I think I've hit just about everything there. That's about it, Morgan.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Okay, Andrew, we're going to come back to you. I know that ROI is incredibly important with respect to any technology implementation to ECC officials. Can you talk to us a little bit about the results that you have experienced since 2019? What's changed in terms of response times, perhaps time savings? And I think most importantly, and not necessarily most importantly, but also telecommunicator wellness and just workload balance, all of those things within your ECC.
Sure thing. So the stats don't lie. I mean, at the end of the day, we all are very data driven, especially when it comes to a return on your investment. So in our organization, last year, for example, we had 10,893 law enforcement related alarms that came through our center. That's almost 11,000. And on top of that, we had 2,300 that were fire and EMS related. So total them up, 13,242 incidents that were dispatched through the ASAP service. If you were to take my same number, like we said earlier, about 2.5, and multiply that for phone calls, and I think realistically, 3.5 or a solid 3 is probably even closer to reality. That's a lot of phone calls. When you're talking, now tens of thousands of phone calls that we've reduced from coming into our center. But it's not just the reduction of the phone calls, it's the increase of the efficiency, like you talked about. When you have these alarm incidents coming to you directly from one computer system into another computer system, I can only imagine the amount of time that we have shaved off on these incidents. And while I don't have specifics, I'm sure that there are fire alarms, for example, where the fire alarm got dispatched, and the processing time that the NFPA looks for was so much faster using the ASAP service. And we got on the scene and maybe and prevented some large scale property damage because we got it as a fire alarm. They found there was just something smoldering versus an alarm company taking the information, having to interpret where it's at, what they need to call. I can't imagine, and I've been into business since 1988 in the 911 business, and I can't imagine working in an alarm monitoring center where I've got to figure out who to call. It's difficult enough with us and having 48 municipalities of looking up, the old fashioned Rolodex, which is all computerized now, but looking up phone numbers. Imagine doing that on a national, in a regional scale. The efficiency that we gain by just having it electronically transmitted, although we can't specifically measure it, it certainly is there. And I would say that the reduction on the burnout of our call takers is that they're not taking 3 and 4 plus phone calls over a singular incident, and if they are, chances are it's a call from a resident about that alarm. And here we're in direct communications with their alarm company. There's no more chasing down who the alarm company was or who was the monitoring center or how do we get back a hold of them. I think we've all taken the calls where you get a reference number, and the reference number is as long as a VIN number. And really on both ends of the system, on the CAD end side of things, I'm sure the alarm monitoring people didn't like having to copy down that type of a reference number. And the same, in the 911 center, when we get these absurdly long reference numbers, with the ASAP service, it's direct, it's in there. Anything you need, you type in, you get the response. It's almost near real time responses. And so that return on investment, I think it speaks volumes. If I had 13,000 incidents last year that were dispatched to the ASAP service, we have to have easily saved 30,000 phone calls. And that's huge. That's a significant impact on our overall workload.
Really great insight. That's excellent insight. Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you and see if you have anything that you want to add with respect to metrics that agencies track related to digital alarm solutions. We'd love to hear from you on that.
Sure. Sorry about that, folks. One of the things that we do when we get started with an agency is we provide you with, I'll call it a report template, to begin looking at how many alarms you take annually, how many per month, and who are those companies that are coming in, so we can look at and process that we're getting you the maximum amount of coverage on that ASAP implementation, and then how that relates to your total number of 911 calls. So we'll give you a report or I'll say a report template up front that you can work with your CAD vendor to create, or if you have CAD resources in-house that can create reports, you can work from that. But basically, that's the kind of things that we look for up front. And then, a lot of what you heard today from Andrew is about, how much time they spend on the phone with alarm calls, initial time of call, callbacks, things like that. This same report then can be expanded after ASAP is in place, and we then shift it to start taking a look at how much time goes into each one of those. Some of that information we get from your telephony system as well. When we look at the amount of time you're spending on those calls, how much time they spent, not only time to answer, but time on hold, are things that, we look at. And those are all things that kind of play into your overall return on investment. The things that are more subjective that, we've talked about here is that telecommunicator wellness. How do you do that? You could be surveying your telecommunicators as far as how they feel about it. You can also survey them to say, are there any agent alarm companies that you're still getting alarms from that we need to get more information from, things like that. All of those things play into telecommunicator wellness. And I'm sure that, I've heard it from agencies that I've talked to, and my old agency also has implemented ASAP. The first thing the telecommunicator says, "You mean I don't have to say I'm operator 521 anymore?" No, there's all of those things that they don't have to do anymore via voice, and that all lends to that telecommunicator wellness. We all know that the ringing phone, like my phone just going off during this webinar, that brings their stress level up. So these are all things that we lend into, that we take a look at with you to determine, are we achieving the right things with the implementation, and those are things that we track.
Wonderful. All right. So let's think a little bit about where ASAP is going. So let's start with Karen, if you don't mind, on this one. Let's talk a little bit about, where do you see automation and ECCs heading with respect to ASAP over the next several years?
Yeah, great question, Morgan. And as I talked about, one of the things we did with ASAP was refreshing the infrastructure. We also have the additional work that's being done by TMA and the PPVAR to do more assessment of alarms before they get transmitted to the ECC. So one of the things that they've recently worked on is automatic threat notification. So that is going to be incorporated into the alarms coming across ASAP. There's also discussion about doing something similar to AVS-01 for fire alarms. In case you don't know what AVS-01 is, it's where the monitoring centers that are part of ASAP go through an evaluation to provide a certain level of information to the ECC as far as the severity level of the alarm. So these are all things that, more automation is going to be coming into play. Automation will continue to grow and expand by necessity. That necessity is what we've talked about here, of all those staffing issues that we've discussed: staffing shortages, staffing overwhelm. We didn't even begin to talk about, the overwhelm and the PTSD and all of those things that the telecommunicators experience on a day-to-day basis. The only way for us, at least as we've seen, right? Because the staffing situation has been around since I was managing an ECC. I was short 20 years ago, short staffed, already had, staff working 12, 16-hour days on a regular basis. So this is not, this landscape is not going to change significantly. So I believe that how we help improve this is through automation, help grow and expand automation in the right way, and done so with a lot of intention. What we're going to do is we're going to be able to handle even more types of alarms instead of just fixed locations, maybe mobile alarms, being able to do more analysis of those alarms, like I discussed, ATN-01 and AVS-01 for fire, things like that. Being able to do more of that analysis relieves that stress on the telecommunicators, relieves that overwhelm that they have. And I like to use the term, become that unseen telecommunicator for them, to take that workload off for them. Additionally, Morgan, there's a lot of complementary solutions that are starting to take root in this public safety market today, such as AI chatbots. And I call them a complementary solution because I do think it is just that. to ASAP. And over time, those solutions as well will gain more technical solidity and also gain more trust in the market and head the way in automation.
Excellent. Thanks, Karen. And on that note, while you said that, I'll just put a plug in for those of you that are on the call and perhaps have a chatbot in your ECC or are thinking about implementing a chatbot. We actually are preparing a webinar for June 24th that we'll be co-hosting with Aurelian to talk about how the platforms work in a complementary fashion. So keep an eye out for that invitation, and we'd love to see y'all back on that webinar in the next couple of months. Okay, we are going to take a moment. I'm just going to remind everyone that there is an opportunity to ask Andrew and Karen any questions that you might have. Please feel free to go ahead and pop them right in the Q&A function, and we will make sure that we have time at the end to address them. And I'm just we've covered mostly everything in our entire agenda today. So let's just talk a little bit about Andrew. I'm going to turn it back over to you. If you can just, to the individuals that are on the call here listening today that are, hopefully considering moving ahead with ASAP service, can you give them some advice? What would you say to them if they're still on the fence, and what advice would you give them to move ahead?
So I think, so often we look at there's so much new technology that comes into the ECCs, and in some aspects, some of that technology, government, it takes us such a long time to procure, and that procurement process means if I decide, today that I'm interested in something, if you're a very strict budget driven center, you may have to plan for that capital for next year. And so that next year, all of a sudden, by the time that you decide to jump off and jump into a particular type of technology, now that technology has changed and you're chasing something else. And so the biggest challenge I see as a manager of an ECC is how fast technology is changing. But the one thing that has not changed, and has not changed since I started in 1988, is alarm calls coming into your ECC. That's a standard that's been there. I don't think I don't see those going away anytime soon. And so if you can find a more efficient way of doing it, such as the ASAP service, this is one of those things that and I know managers often have and directors often have discretionary funding of things that almost I tell my boss now I need to have a certain that stash of cash for the unknown, like what's coming out that I really need to take advantage of that's going to have an immediate impact on my operation. And so we're even almost like a not necessarily a contingency fund for when things go wrong, but and I would never call it a slush fund, but but a more fund that is something that this technology is going to change so fast. The ROI on ASAP is incredible. It has that impact on you from absolute day one, and even pre-day one. There's just the simple fact that you now have the ability to see the database that the alarm companies are working with, and that you'll be able to validate and pre-validate your geo file with them. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, so before you even flip the switch and turn on your CAD function, that ASAP to PSAP is already showing a return on investment by validating the alarms that are in your jurisdiction at the companies that operate with the ASAP service. So my advice to you is that this is one of those solid, proven technologies. It's been out there. Alarm companies are not going anywhere, and rather than having to use another service that's similar to a chatbot that you have to look at it, transcribe it, and then enter the information, the ASAP service is a direct integration to your CAD system. It'll have a return on your investment literally from day one, and it's incredibly affordable. Every operation I know is different, so it's very difficult to talk about pricing it in a webinar such as this. But I can assure you that you are taking advantage of a collaborative, and that collaborative is not just the other ECCs that are involved in this, but also the alarm monitoring centers that understand the importance and the value that they get out of this. And so by participating in that collaborative or in that consortium of people, it's driving that cost even farther down. So it's reasonably priced. I can guarantee you it'll be cheaper than having one of your dispatch staff on duty 24/7. It doesn't take vacation time. It doesn't call in sick, and it's there reliably. Not to steal thunder on a future topic, but one thing we didn't really talk about is we all have, especially, I'm in the Midwest, so we have these spring storms that come through, and you have these sudden peaks of incredible busyness. And obviously, an electrical storm, a thunderstorm, causes more, malfunctioning alarms, and this thing just hums along. I mean, so the alarms continue to come into you. We know that it's a thunderstorm, and we continue to dispatch. But you can also, if your CAD system allows for a storm mode, for example, where things are reduced slightly, that whole reduction of the number of phone calls coming into your organization I mean, the value you really can't tell. But my key point to that whole thing is that if you're on the fence about this, I can tell you from a medium size, I'm the third largest county in Ohio. I would consider us a medium sized dispatch center. Last year, we had documented 569,000 dispatchable incidents. And so it had enough of an impact on us that it is truly a value where you will see the return on your investment almost immediately. It's worth the effort. And for those who have technical people that roll their eyes, say, here we go with another technology that we're going to integrate into our CAD system. Well, this is one of those that, again, it's just like having an extra telecommunicator on staff that consistently, reliably answers those calls for you. And I can't say enough about the value that we get out of that service.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And with Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you just to close, kind of give us a last list. What should agencies prioritize as they're evaluating the solution? And, what should they be thinking about before they make the transition? And then we can go ahead and close today.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and a lot of this plays right into what Andrew said, so I'm going to keep it really short. Look for a solution that handles the majority of the alarms and gives the most relief to your telecommunicators. Something that's simple to implement, and again, providing that full value and the most information and relief to those telecommunicators. When you do those two things combined, it results in something that we all strive to achieve, and that's community impact, increasing that community impact by building that trust, improving reliability and accuracy. And we all know what one mishandled incident happens in regard to community trust. This solution just assists you into handling every situation that comes through from an alarm with that ultimate reliability and accuracy, and really just helps our clients, our ECCs that are using ASAP, increase that community impact. And that's all I have for today, Morgan.
Excellent, Karen. Okay, we just one last call for questions. If you have them, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A and we will address them. I want to give a massive thanks to Andrew Knapp for setting aside the time that he set aside with us today. We are so grateful that you are able to share your experience with all of us. And I also want to say a big thank you to Karen Carlson for spending some time with us today. And last but not least, a very big thank you for the audience who we appreciate you logging in for the last 50 minutes. It was great to spend the last hour with you. If you have any questions, you can feel free to respond to your email that you should get here shortly this afternoon with today's recording, and we can make sure that we address them. But we wish you all a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining. Talk to you all later.